Hey, what's going on? I'm back. What's happening? This your girl Tiffany coming through right here live in effect. Make sure y'all hit that notification bell and subscribe to the channel and share this video. All right, so tonight I'm back because I want to give my thoughts and commentary on this book right here, which is called They Were Her Property, written by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. Okay. So she wrote this book in 2019. All right, so it ain't been around not even 2 years yet, I don't believe. But anyways, I must say that there's a lot of information in that book that is mind-blowing. And I mean, when I say it's mind-blowing, it's very mind-blowing. So what I'm going to show you guys, right, I'm going to read some of the stuff that I have highlighted, but I also had the PDF. So let me show you guys the PDF right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the text in this book, and then I'm going to talk about it, all right? So you guys pay attention. Okay. So right here, this is the PDF. Okay. So let's look at the introduction. As a matter of fact, this book was written in 2019. We're going to go to the intro. So the intro is Mistresses of the Market, Mistresses in the Making, which is chapter 1. So far I have got on these 2 chapters, okay? But you see, I belong to Mrs. done her own bossing. And chapter 4 is she thought she could find a better market. And chapter 5, wet nurse for sale or hire. So y'all get the gist of that. It's 9 chapters in this book. Well, actually, yeah, it's 9 chapters. So you can might as well include the epilogue as the 9th chapter. So in this book, basically, the author did some of the archives and information of interviews that was given to former slaves. And according to those former slaves, they was giving their accounts and stories about the female slave masters they were on, that was under their they had control over them. So they basically was telling the story to these interviewers around the time after slavery. I think it was after Reconstruction era and around the 1930s or whatnot. So what the author did, she was able to collect all their information, go into those archives, and pretty much write it in the book. Now, many of us may wonder, well, why they never talk about this in school? Why we ain't never heard about the white women owning slaves? Why we ain't never heard about it? Why is it such a secret? Why are they hiding these information? Why is that we know just about the white men, but not about the white women and the women they were married to? Well, we finna find out. So let's read right here. It says, in the 1859, after touring the antebellum South, the journalist and New York Tribune editor James Redpath attempted to explain for his readers why white Southern women opposed emancipation. He believed that their sentiments were tied to a lifetime of indoctrination, reared as they were under the shadow of the peculiar institution. Slavery was incessantly praised and defended virtually everywhere they went by everyone they knew and in most of the publication they read. Their conscience, thus early perverted, were never afterwards appalled to, with the result that they saw no reason to change their views. All right, so it says Redpath assumed that white Southern women did not know Negro slavery as it is because their society shielded them from the institution's horrific realities. Insinuated by Southern patriarchs, white women seldom saw slavery's most obnoxious features. They never attended auctions, never witnessed examinations, seldom, if ever, see the Negro's lashes. More profoundly, they did not know that the interstate trade in slaves was a gigantic commerce. Southern men revealed only the South side view of slavery, and if the women of the South knew slavery as it is, he was convinced that they would join in the protest against it. All right, so far in this paragraph, it gives the account of an editor and a journalist who tried to make an excuse of why Southern women opposed slavery, and he felt like they didn't know any better or they didn't have any clue of what was going on. They just knew that it was getting profit, but they didn't know the outcomes and the whole process and how it took place. This is what James Redpath was trying to explain, but it goes a lot deeper. So as you can see, right down here it says slave-owning women not only witnessed the most brutal features of slavery, they took part in them, profit from them, and defended them. Let's start right there. So these women played their part and their duty in the slavery. There were those who were abolitionists, but there were those who were slave owners, and they became slave owners at a young age. They were trained to be that way. Oh yeah, it goes there. So far, with that first paragraph about James Redpath not knowing that these women, or tried to justify their excuse about why they were against emancipation, etc., it was bogus to me, because I felt like a lot of them knew what was going on, but they just didn't want to put it in the forefront. They didn't want to tell it. They didn't want nobody to know that their women was involved in it too. So they just wanted to make it look like it was just the white man or a group of white men doing it all versus the women being a part of it. So that first paragraph shows that the journalist at that time during the antebellum South, it was just bogus. He could not, his excuse was not enough to bring about justification. Continue. So right down here, the name of the slave owner was Martha Gibbs. Okay, so she was one of those women who owned slaves. As a matter of fact, Lit Young was one of her former slaves. Okay, she was interviewed as part of the Federal Writers Project of the Work Progress Administration. So according to Lit Young, Gibbs was a big, rich Irish woman. And what did it say? Who wasn't scared of no man. She owned and operated a large steam sawmill on the Warner Bayou in Vicksburg, where it emptied into the Mississippi River. She also owned a significant number of slaves, so many, in fact, that she had to build 2 sets of whitewashed quarters with glass windows to house them all. She also built a nice church with glass windows and a brass capello for their worship. She fed them well, but she worked them hard too. In step with other slave owners throughout the South, Gibbs employed an overseer to make sure that people she kept enslaved performed the tasks delegated to them, but she also oversaw her overseer. Almost every morning, she buckled on 2 guns and came out to the place to personally ensure that things were running smoothly, and she outcussed a man when things didn't go right. So that go to show you that the white woman wasn't no different than her man. They were just as brutal and very cruel, just like the white man. They were trained that way. And oh, what makes it interesting, it was an Irish woman. An Irish woman. Yeah. Yeah, there was some Irish people that owned slaves. Yep, there sure was. This Irish woman was just as cruel and demeaning like her white male counterparts. But she wasn't the only one. She was not the only one. Let's continue. Oh, it gets real nasty. It says twice married and once widowed, Gibbs would not permit either of her husbands to interfere with her financial affairs, including the management of her slaves, even though her second husband was a reputable physician in Pittsburgh. He had little influence over her or the slave-related activities on their plantation. Lit Young remember Gibbs' husband addressing her after witnessing the brutal whippings her overseer inflicted upon her slaves. And he softly interjected, "Darling, you ought not to whip them poor black folks so hard. They is going to be free just like us sometimes." Unfazed, she snapped, "Shut up. Sometimes I believe you is a Yankee anyways." She was right. During the Civil War, he served the Union forces by treating injured soldiers. So this woman right here was so damn cruel, and she was beating the shit out of the overseer because he ain't do, or he messed up his duty when he was obligated to. And it got to a point where her husband said, "Hey, you need to stop that." So she basically ignored him and said, "You know what?" Basically what she was saying is, "Fuck you, get the fuck out the way." You know what I'm saying? You ain't nothing but, I get when she called him a Yankee, basically she was saying something offensive. Basically what she was saying is, "You ain't nothing but a weak ass motherfucker." That's basically what she was saying to her husband in this book. So with that being said, these white women didn't give a fuck. They were very crucial. You know what I'm saying? They would do anything above and beyond. Yeah, they seemed like they were sweet and kind-hearted, but when it came down to business and it came down to money, they were going to do whatever it takes to get that. And if you fucked up, then they was going to take it out on you. But let's continue. There's more. Oh, there is more. So let's see. Let's go down to where it says, married slave-owning women like Martha Gibbs have received scant attention in historical scholarship. Historians have acknowledged that some Southern women owned slaves, but they usually focus on the wealthiest single or widow women. When they do encounter married slave-owning women in 19th century records, they generally assume that the women's legal status as wives prevented them from owning slaves in their own right. Well, we all know that, unfortunately, that was not the case. That was not the case, because they still was able to own slaves, whether they were married or single. And they also say historians rarely differentiate between married women who own enslaved people in their own right and married women who merely lived in the household in which they engaged with, managed, and benefit from the labor of the enslaved people that others owned. Historians rarely consider why slave ownership might have mattered to the women in question, to the enslaved people they own, to slave-holding communities, to the institution of slavery, or more broadly to the region. Historians have neglected these women because their behavior towards and relationships with their slaves do not conform to prevailing ideas about white women and slave mastery. So in other words, the information was there all along, but it was kept on the hush. It was thrown under the brush. That's what it was. And if many women, especially black women, was reading this book, they would have a different attitude about joining an organization like the feminist organization. They would have a different attitude. They would have a whole entire different perspective and different view. Because why? Well, let's see. Let me show you why. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and read from my book. Because I'm going to show you why you're going to have a different perspective. All right, so let me read right here in my book. I got the physical copy. It says, historians who explored slavery's relationship to capitalism generally focus on the roles that men play in development of both. But if we consider the very real possibility that some of the enslaved people, these men compelled to work in southern cotton fields, actually belong to their wives. The narrative about American slavery and capitalism would be strikingly different. And when we consider that the enslaved people women owned before they married or acquired afterward helped make the 19th century scale of Southern cotton cultivation possible, the narrative of slavery, 19th century markets and capitalism as the domain of men become untenable. Let's go back to the part where if we consider the very real possibility that some of the enslaved people, these men compelled to work in the southern cotton fields, actually belong to their wives. So that goes to show you that not only these white men had slaves for themselves, but they also had slaves for their wives. So that way their wives can be able to make a profit. So in other words, the slaves were an investment to the Europeans at that time. They were an investment. They were the stock market. That's what they were. But we're going to get to the part about the children. But I got to show you that these men, these white men, they didn't bring the slaves around just for their own purpose, but they also brought them around for their family. So they became a part of the inheritance. So if the husband passed away, the wife has something that was left over, right? The slaves became her inheritance. The slaves became hers. Then eventually it'll become the children. But let's see. What else? Right here it says Adam Smith, the preeminent 18th century economist, argued that a married woman's financial dependency upon her husband bound her to be faithful and constant to her spouse. In line with Smith's thinking, we tend to imagine marriage as a colonial or 19th century woman's primary, if not her only avenue to financial stability. And for many women, this was true. So, marriage at that time for many women was a form of financial stability. It was more so about gaining finances than being in love with somebody or being happily ever after. The primary goal was finances. So, but circumstances existed in which white men were economically dependent. Oh, hold on. But circumstances existed in which white men were economically dependent upon, even in debt to the women they married. So therefore, these white men were broke. They didn't have shit to offer. So they depended on their wives for financial support. Hold on. And this was a widely recognized fact, even in the North. Abigail Adams, the second First Lady of the United States, advised her son, John Quincy, to postpone marriage until he had accumulated enough property to ensure that he would not be wholly dependent upon the wealth his future wife might bring into their household. In other words, Abigail Adams basically told her son, look, you ain't got your shit together. You're not financially stable. So you don't need to be talking about marriage right now. You need to just wait a minute, put that on pause, get your finances together. Then, before you get married, do not sit here and depend on your wife's wealth and income that she brings to the table, which, according to this book, were the slaves. So basically, what she was saying, you need to go out there and get your own shit, get your own money. And once you got your own money, then that's when you can start your family. So it says, when John Quincy hinted at the possibility that he might indeed marry for money. Yeah, you heard that right. Might indeed marry for money. That's what they did. They married for money. Abigail firmly advised him never to form connections until he saw a prospect of supporting a family. So what does that word connection means? Hold on. Oh, wait a minute. Am I or unless I misspelled the word shit, unless hold on. Okay, well, I couldn't find that word in the dictionary, so maybe that's just that the English way of speaking at that time period, because they didn't use the standard English that we speak today, so it was more like King James type of English. So so maybe that she meant connections. I don't know. Anyways, but it says until he saw a prospect of supporting a family. All right. So it says, in his response, John Quincy assured his mother that he would never be in debt to his wife for his property. So he said, Mama, I'm gonna make sure I get my shit together before I marry somebody. So what you learn is not only that the women married because of financial stability, but the men also married these white women because of financial stability. All right. Anyways, let's go ahead and continue. So it says, in the South, slave-owning women possessed the kind of wealth that prospect suitors and planters in training hope to acquire or have at their disposal. Why else would John more crassly tell his cousin Mary and Richard that girls bait their hooks with niggers? And the more they can stick on, the better success they would have in securing a worthy husband. According to John Moore, even young women outside of the ranks of the most elite slave holders who typically own 20 or more slaves could increase their chances of marrying well if they own a few. He told his cousins that the girl that has but one or two will get a few nibbles and occasionally catch a drought, but not until he has tried and failed at the larger hooks. As this correspondence suggests, some men enter their marriages with little or no wealth, with little or no wealth, and their unions with purported women became their primary avenue to financial independence. So if these white men knew that these white girls was wealthy, they was gonna marry them. But a white man's pecuniary circumstances could change drastically upon marriage because state and local laws generally gave husbands control over the property their wives bought to the marriage. That's that patriarchal concept, that patriarchal shit. Simply by marrying a woman with property, even if she maintained control of it, a man could improve his position. Husbands often borrow money from their wives. And use the enslaved people their wives inherited to cultivate the lands they bought with those loans. Legal petitions are on record in which women describe themselves as their husbands' creditors and financiers. Creditors and financiers. Don't it get interesting? Many of these women did not accept the loss of their legal claims to the property they brought into their marriages. In fact, many married female petitioners describe their slaves as property they still owned and controlled, and consider their husbands control temporary. As we shall see, the courts often agreed with them. Enslaved people also testified to the ways such ideas shape marital relations in white households. Thus, in many respects, married women, their slaves, and their other assets made their husbands' commercial endeavors possible and enabled slavery to thrive in ways it might not have without those women's economic investment in the institution. All right, so let's talk about the term mistress. Now, see, when we hear the term mistress of today, we thinking the side woman or the side chick, right? Somebody who's messing around with a married man, correct? Yes. But actuality, the term mistress, according to this book, it says, in this book, I employed the term mistress in a radically different way, one that aligns more closely with its original meaning. In Western Europe, a mistress was a woman who governed correlative to a subject or to a servant. She was a woman who had something in her possession. And according to the historian Amy Louise Erickson, that something was capital. A mistress also exercised dominion, rule, or power. So it says the term mistress did not signify a married woman's subservient legal position or a woman's subordinate status to that of a master. So that means the mistress is a female version of the master. All right, so you got the master, which represents the male dominance, and you got the mistress, which represents the female dominance. But you know, there's another term for that too, right? Madam. Madam is another term which also represents the female dominant figure. All right, so let's go ahead and Oh, see, this is the part I didn't pay attention to right here. It says, as the historian James Oakes has pointed out, some African descended people, indigenous people, and women were viable and active members of the master class. Race and gender, however, create unique constraints that these groups had to endure, adapt to, or circumvent. The experience of slave ownership was different for married women. The legal doctrine that placed their persons and their goods under their husband control compelled them to take extra steps to secure their separate ownership and management of enslaved people, processes that were not required of men. Their legal subordination to their husbands also meant that women could potentially find themselves in court when spouse, kin, and community members jeopardized or violate their property rights or attempted to exploit them. These special contingency could prove to be insurmountable impediments for Southern women who might hold or want to hold legal title to enslaved people, and who might want to exercise control over the enslaved people they own or came to possess. But the women discussed in this book were not dismayed or deterred by the legal challenges. They and their families took the steps necessary to own and maintain control of the enslaved people given to them by loved ones or bought or acquired upon, during, and after marriage. Such steps were neither simple nor easy, that women decided to take them to secure slave property for their own use and benefit reveals their deep economic interest and investment in the system of American slavery. Their willingness to do these things suggests that they were more, not less, invested in slavery and its growth than some men were. So, before I continue on, you guys, you gotta remember, slavery was a business. The object of the game is economics. Slavery is what helped build capitalism. For the people in the back, slavery is what helped build capitalism. That was the biggest investment. If you had slaves, it depends on how many slaves you own. If you had a lot of slaves, let's say you had 12, 20, or 13, 14, 30 slaves, that was a big investment for you. You was going to make a huge amount of profit if you had that many slaves. So what they saw is an investment. They saw that building their financial portfolio, and it helped to increase their business. So it was not just the men that was involved, it was the women that had their hand on it. And it sounded like to me the women were the ones that came up with the idea of convincing their husband to bring slaves over to America so they can be able to accumulate properties and be able to have passive income and earn income. So that's what I'm picking up as I'm reading this book. I'm picking up that so far it was basically the women that was behind all of this. They was the mastermind, basically convincing their husband, hey, you need to go and get some slaves and bring them on the plantation so that way we can have profits and we can be able to pass down generational wealth. That's the way I'm understanding it. So don't y'all be fooled now. Don't y'all be fooled. And then it also says, after they was given their interview, the former slaves, this is how the formerly enslaved people may have found their interviews tense and uncomfortable. But many of them spoke openly of the tragedies and trauma in slavery nonetheless, despite the possibility of provoking a violent reaction. Formerly enslaved people spoke with their white interviewers about matters as intimate as cross-racial sexual violence, white paternity of enslaved children, and incest. Y'all know what incest is? That means having sex with family members. And as horrifying as torture inflicted by their masters and mistresses or former owners who murdered enslaved people. They argue that these were things along with the constant threat of sales that would remove them from their homes and families that they could never forget, regardless how much time they had elapsed. So, dealing with the whole family brought about traumatic experience to these individuals. And it was hard for many of them at that time to come forward and give an interview telling their life story, sharing their experience of being under the control and leadership of not only the white man, but also the white woman. It was just very traumatic for them. As y'all can see, I'm getting a little pissed off as I'm reading this because that's how intense this is. Like if you read this, you're gonna have a different point of view. And you're gonna look at white women, the Karens, the Beckys, you're gonna look at them differently. You're gonna give them the side eye. And for you black women out there, you're gonna wish that you ain't never joined the feminist organization or support those feminist organizations after reading this book right here. Because it's very intense. But you got to dig deep into the history. It's deeper than what you think. Talking about a subject such as slavery is not easy. It's not an easy topic. It's not one of those conversations that you want to have. It's a very difficult conversation to talk about in the family, especially to the younger generation, because it's so intense. But it has to be said. And you can't tell me that this woman didn't do her diligent research. Obviously, she did for her to compile this book up. And I can only imagine that it took a long time. It took some years for her to actually gather all these information and be able to write a book like this. It takes a lot of archives digging, encyclopedia, going to libraries and dealing with anthropologists and historians and all these various people going through peer reviews just to put a book out like this. And you know what? I don't even really have to read the whole entire book just to know where it's going. Because chapter 1 is like a pretty long chapter here. It's very long. But the introduction and the first chapter itself just already let me know that I see the direction where it's going. Now I see exactly where it's finna lead me to. But let's go ahead and continue. Let's look at, and let's read this last part right here. It says slave-owning women rarely talk about their economic investment in slavery, and they wrote about them even less. Of course, they're not going to talk about their economic investment. You're not going to tell the right hand, you're not going to tell your left hand what your right hand is doing. Or you're not going to tell the right hand what the left hand is doing. You're not going to do it. So no, they not going to put it into the public's eye. They're not going to expose their little dirty secrets. So no, they weren't going to say anything about their financial investment. Just like a lot of these banks weren't going to say anything about their role in slavery. Just like some of these colleges and universities weren't going to speak on their role in slavery. No, they weren't. Of course, they was going to keep it behind closed doors. I mean, come on now. Their silence did not reflect their aversion to slavery or human trafficking. Many of them simply did not have the time or skill to put their thoughts on paper. While those who did probably saw their pecuniary investment in slavery as commonplace and unworthy of note, this is their story. Could have been guilt, possibly. Could have been shame, possibly. So they probably was feeling guilty about what they were doing. Then there was those that just didn't want to reveal the secret because they didn't want to lose their power. Woo! Woo, Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. All right, so chapter 1. As I was reading this book, as y'all can see, I had to highlight a lot of the stuff in here. It's a lot of highlighting going on, okay? So let's look at the mistresses in the making. All right, so I'm going to read the first 2 paragraphs. It says, Lizzie Anna Burrell was like many other white girls growing up in slave-holding household in Linsville, North Carolina area in 1847. She loved flowers and often strolled through her parents' garden with Fanny, the enslaved woman charged with her care. After spending so much time with Fanny, Lizzie Anna developed an intense bond with her, but one day Lizzie Anna became vexed with Fanny, so she went to her father and demanded that he cut Fanny's ears off and get her, Lizzie Anna, a new maid from Clarksville. Lizzie Anna was 3 years old. This is a 3-year-old child telling her father, Daddy, can't you cut off Fanny's ear? Yeah, and get rid of Fanny. I want a new slave. I want a new maid. I don't want Fanny anymore. You can cut her ears off. Yes, those white children was given power over slaves. In other words, they were made to believe that these people had no values. They were just property. So a little white girl went to her daddy, hey, cut her ear off for me. I want a new slave. And what did daddy do? What did the daddy do? Oh, hold on. Let me read this. It says, although young children commonly express displeasure in extravagant, even violent language, the terms they use reflected their environment. And Lizzie Anna's complaint tells us something crucial about hers. During those walks through the garden and perhaps while observing her parents' interaction with the enslaved people around them, Lizzie Anna was learning how to be a slave owner. She was coming to understand the obscene logic that made it perfectly acceptable to enjoy the company of her enslaved caretaker in one moment and threaten to mutilate her to or buy another slave to take her place the next. In the comfort of her home, she was recognizing that she possessed the power to command others to do as she wished. And her father did little to discourage her from that belief. In fact, he relayed the incident to his sister with an air of convivial amusement, which suggests that Lizzie Anna's aunt also accepted the justification for her niece's behavior. So, at that time, in other words, these little white kids didn't get no discipline from their parents or from their adult relatives if they said anything very negative about the slaves. If they command any wishes, even if it was something very gruesome, such as this, nothing was done because guess what? They were trained to look at slaves as just property, as nothing else. Don't see any value in them. Now, this child was 3 years old. Then goes on in the book, talk about how these enslaved people had to look up to these white kids and say master and mistress. These are kids, and some were young as 1 year old, and some was young as 6 months, and some were just newborns. You had to look at them and say master and mistress. Imagine that. And you know what? It was coming throughout Jim Crow period, where if the white folks was walking on one side of the street, if there was a white child walking on this side of the street, y'all both walking on the same wall, you had to go the opposite side. And you had to hold your head down and say, yes, sir, to the white child. Or if there was a white girl, yes, ma'am. You had to hold your head down. You couldn't even look them in the eye. And this was during the Jim Crow period. All right. But during slavery, they had to refer to them as mistress and master. Or they say master and missus. In our country slang, we say missus or master. That's how they had to refer to these kids. These kids weren't even really old enough to talk. They didn't even have a full brain development process to be able to know what it means to own a slave and be able to take on a serious responsibility. But you had somebody that was older than them that had to look at them as a higher figure. Look at them as if they are the adults, as if they are in control. But there was a reason. They were training them that, hey, you're going to have to take over one day. You're going to have my inheritance. I'm not going to be here. So the power is going to be given to you. So in case something happens, you know what to do. You know how to run things. You know how to keep these slaves in line. You got to keep the generational wealth coming. That was the attitude. All right, so hold on. And it says, white Southern girls like Lizzie Anna learned how to be mistresses and slave owners through an instructional process that spanned their childhood and adolescence. Over the course of these formative years, white girls practiced techniques of slave discipline and management and made mistakes and learned from them, modified their behavior to meet various conditions, and ultimately decided what kind of slave owners they wanted to become. It should come as no surprise that many of them wanted to be profitable ones. No, Because again, slavery was built off the concept of capitalism. So no, it's not a surprise. They saw that as an investment, as a way to make profit. The more slaves you have, the more money you was getting. It says slave owning parents were critical to this learning process in two important ways. They gave enslaved men, women, and children to their young daughters as gifts on special occasions like baptism. Like baptism. Birthdays, especially 21st birthdays. Holidays, and marriage, and for no reason at all. They also bequeathed enslaved people to their daughters in their wills. And when human property was transferred to them, these young women came to value the crucial ties between slave ownership and autonomous, stable financial futures. Parents also offer their daughters vicarious lessons in how to own and control enslaved people through their own words and deeds. As young girls watched their parents manage the enslaved people around them, they observed different models of slave mastery and through a process of trial and error developed styles of their own. White Southern girls grew up alongside the slaves their parents gave them. They cultivated relationships of control and sometimes love. The promise of slave ownership became an important element of their identity, something that would shape their relationships with their husbands and communities once they reach adulthood. All right, now it goes on to talk about the primogeniture. So primogeniture basically means that the eldest child is the first to receive all the family inheritance, meaning that the eldest child is the one that's overseeing everything. So if something happened to the parent, they're going to be the one next in line. So that's how the law worked back then, that the oldest child was the one that was next in line. If something happened to mama or daddy or to both, they were going to be the main ones getting it because they were the oldest. So by them being the oldest, they had to be in control and they had to take on those responsibilities that was left over. All right, so it says in the colonial period, the primogeniture, the practice of leaving all the family property to the eldest son, help parents determine the size and nature of each child's inheritance or whether a child would inherit it at all. During and after the revolution, however, Americans looked upon primogeniture unfavorably, not only because it is disadvantaged many young men and women, but because it was the means by which British aristocrats secured their power and ensured that it remained within their ancestral lines. The newly declared states moved to abolish primogeniture. South Carolina and Delaware abolished it in 1776. Virginia did so in 1785. And every state except Massachusetts and Rhode Island had abolished the practice by 1786. By the end of the century, the historian C. Ray Kim observed equal portion for all children was generally the rule of inheritance. But even before the abolition of primogeniture in these states, individuals could circumvent it by writing their wills in ways that allowed them to bequeath their property however they choose. All right, so you know what? Let's go ahead and let's skip. Like I told you, chapter 1 is a very long chapter in this book. It's a very long chapter. So I already know the direction it's going. It says enslaved people often knew that they would be given to their owners' daughters well before the transfer of ownership took place. Because White recalled that his owners always said that he was to belong to Miss Katie. Against James' master chose her as a gift for his daughter, Janie Little, because as James remembered, he give all his daughters one of us to have a care for them. Just as enslaved people came to anticipate the transition from one owner to the next, young white girls did too. All right. So let's look at something. And I think some of you may be familiar with her name and some of you may not, but I'm going to read this passage. It says, as they planned their daughters' futures, some slave owning parents preferred to give their daughters female slaves. That's not a surprise. And they began doing so when their children were only infants. In 1836, when Mary Fuller Knight was 8 months old, her father executed a deed of gift that gave her an enslaved female named Rose, as well as any children Rose might have in the future. When the slave owner and future abolitionist Sarah Grimmick was a child. Sarah Grimmick. Who was she? Let's look her up. Sarah Grimmick. Let's look up Sarah real fast. So who was she? Who was she? Who was she? Who was she? Let's look at her biography. All right. That's her, Sarah Moore Grimmick. All right, so what does they say about her in here? So Sarah Moore Grimmick was an American abolitionist widely held to be the mother of the women's suffrage movement. Born and reared in South Carolina to a prominent wealthy planter family, she moved to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the 1820s and became a Quaker, as did her young sister Angelina. The sisters began to speak on the abolitionist lecture circuit, joining a tradition of women who had been speaking in public on political issues since colonial days, including Susanna Wright, Hannah Griffiths, Susie B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Anna Dickinson. They recounted their knowledge of slavery firsthand, urged abolition, and also became activists for women's rights. Yep, that's her. This lady right here. Yep, at one point in time, she was a slave owner, and she became an abolitionist. Let's look further down. All right, so right here, it says she was the sixth of 14 children, the second daughter of Mary Smith and John Farcherod Grimmick, or however you say his name. Their father was a rich planter and an attorney and judge in South Carolina. What an interesting thing. At one point, Speaker of the South Carolina House of Representatives. All right. So it says Sarah's early experience with education shaped her future as an abolitionist and a feminist. Uh-oh. So Sarah Grimmick was a feminist. Yes. Uh-oh. Throughout her childhood, she was keenly aware of the inferiority of her education when compared to her brother's classical one. Although her family recognized her remarkable intelligence, she was prevented from obtaining a substantive education or pursuing her dreams of becoming an attorney, as these goals were considerably unwomanly. She was educated by private tutors on subjects considered appropriate for a young Southern woman of her class, including French, embroidery painting with watercolors, and playing the harpsichord. Her father allowed Sarah to study geography, history, and mathematics from the books in his library and to read his law books. However, he drew the line at her learning Latin. All right. So let's look at this. It says Sarah's mother, Mary, was a dedicated homemaker and an active member in the community. She was a leader in Charleston Ladies Benevolent Society. Mary was also an active Episcopalian, or however you say it, shit, and consequently often devoted herself to the poor and to women incarcerated in a nearby prison. Mary's beliefs were rigid. In addition, her many charitable activities kept her from developing affectionate relationships with her children. Feeling confined in her role, Sarah developed a connection to her family's slaves to the extent that unsettled her parents. From the time she was 12 years old, Sarah spent her Sundays afternoons teaching Bible classes to the young slaves on the plantation, an experience she found frustrating. While she desperately wanted to teach them to read the scripture for themselves, and they had a longing for such learning, her parents prohibited this, as teaching slaves to read was illegal. Her parents also said that literacy will only make the slaves unhappy and rebellious, making them unfit for manual labor. Teaching slaves to read had been prohibited since 1740 in South Carolina. All right. So it says, Sarah secretly taught Hetty, her personal enslaved girl. Yes, you read that right. Her personal enslaved girl to read and write. But when her parents discovered the young tutor at work, the vehemence of her father's response proved alarming. He was furious and nearly had the young slave girl whipped. Fear of causing trouble for the slaves themselves prevented Sarah from undertaking such a task again. Years afterwards, she reflected on the incident, writing, "I took an almost malicious satisfaction in teaching my little waiting maid at night when she was supposed to be occupied in combing and brushing my locks. The light was put out the keyhole screen and flat on our stomachs before the fire. With the spelling book under our eyes, we defied the laws of South Carolina." All right, so I don't have to go any further. You guys can read up more information about her on your own time. So basically, she was very traumatized. Although she was trained to be a slave owner, but at the same time, it was traumatizing to her because what she witnessed what her father was doing. Because she was teaching one of the slaves how to read. Her father wanted to come into the room and he found out, and he was going to whip the hell out of the slave in front of her face. So she was like, "Look, I don't even want no part of this no more. This is too much. I can't deal with this." I mean, although her intention seemed like it was good, it seemed like she had a heart, but because she played her role in that, it will bring a different attitude as far as who she was. I mean, when you read a story about somebody like Sarah Gimmick, who was an abolitionist, but when you start learning that she grew up owning slaves, then it makes one feel some kind of way. It makes people feel like, well, she done did her part. Yes, she fought against slavery. Yes, she was anti this, but it doesn't change the fact that she supported at one point in time the brutality of those who were enslaved. And remind you, she was a feminist. But y'all know the history about feminism, right? For those of you that do. The white feminists, oh, they had a very prejudiced attitude towards the black women, which is why black women decided, okay, we can't join y'all organization. We gonna create our own shit. Because for some reason, y'all still on that racist ass shit. Y'all not really about women as a whole. Y'all really just care more about yourselves because it benefits you. But you know what? Let me read one more thing. Yeah, I want to read one more, and then I'll be done. Right here, it says on May 9th, 1857, Alfred, a 12 or 13-year-old enslaved boy who was living in Washington County, Georgia, allegedly told Godfrey Martin, the son of his master, Green Martin, to kiss his Deray. So I'm assuming the word Deray means ass. You know what? Yeah, let me look that up. Okay, yeah, the word Deray, which is a French word that means ass. So, I was right. Okay. Anyways, it says, over the course of 3 hours, Green and Godfrey Martin beat Alfred to death. Let's read that again. On May 9th, 1857, Alfred, a 12 or 13-year-old enslaved boy who was living in Washington County, Georgia, allegedly told Godfrey Martin, the son of his master, Green Martin, to kiss his Deray, which means ass. Over the course of 3 hours, Green and Godfrey Martin beat Alfred to death. On at least 2 occasions, Green Martin straddled Alfred, choked him, and threw him on the floor. Godfrey poured water on Alfred to prevent him from fainting. Then, after Green was done, Godfrey fetched a saddle, commanded Alfred to kneel on all fours, placed the saddle on his back, and sat on him for a quarter of an hour. After doing so, he beat him with a stick, kicked him, and threw him on the ground, and finally dragged him about the yard. Although most southern states had laws that allowed slave owners to punish their slaves with impunity, even if such discipline led to death, such legislation often barred slave holders from punishing enslaved people with malice. Many of these laws also delineate in minute detail the instruments slaveholders could lawfully use to punish enslaved people. If they used methods or tools that did not meet the specification outlined in these laws, they could be punished themselves. Someone in Green Martin's slaveholding community must have considered his action abhorrent enough to report him to local authorities, because Martin soon found himself charged with Alfred's murder. Martin was convicted and sentenced to execution by hanging, but he appealed to the Georgia Supreme Court, and the justice agreed to review his case. So, a young man gets beaten to death for telling his slave master to kiss his ass. telling the slave master to kiss his ass. No, tell his son. So both the son and the master took him out. That's the kind of punishment. So now, in all conclusion, because I'm gonna stop. In our conclusion, I would still say get this book. If you don't have it, you need to get it. And you can also get the PDF, the ebook, because that's where you can go into more details. Whatever information you did not catch in school or while you was in college, you can read on your own. And it's going to be a lot of things that's going to trigger the emotions. And it does. But it's worth it. It's worth finding out what really took place. Because, see, you're only going to get partial. But as you start to go further, gradually, you will learn that it was more than what you thought it was. This is a very powerful book. And would I recommend it to be in somebody's archive? Yes, absolutely. I recommend this book. And also, colleges and universities should already have this book in their lessons, especially those who are dealing with, if they are studying African American history or African studies, this book should be on the list. This book should be in the sociology class, the anthropology class. It should be a part of the archives. So I think this woman, the author, did a phenomenal job. It's a lot of information and it's a lot of things that's just very gruesome and very disturbing. But she did a great job at doing the research, because it takes a lot to research this kind of information and compile them together in the article and in the book. So I think that this book is really educational and is very useful. So if you guys don't have it, please make sure you guys do so. The name of the book again is They Were Her Property. And I will show you the PDF again. Give me a moment. All right, I'm trying to get this PDF up. Okay, so, all right, for some reason, it's not loading up the PDF. I had it on here. Hold on. All right, I got it. Hello, sis. What's going on? How you doing, Sister Courtney? Thank you for coming through. All right, so you guys, there we go. So you guys can download the PDF. You can get the ebook, and of course, you can find it on Amazon. And also, I would recommend you guys also try out this app called the Script. The Script is a book app, so they have a lot of auto books. They have a lot of As a matter of fact, I can pull it up for you guys. I'll pull up my account. Hold on, let me pull up my account for y'all. But yeah, make sure you guys check out the PDF, the ebook. You can get the ebook. And let me stop this. Hold on, let me. Hold on, let me. Trying to get this off of here. Hold up. What the heck? Hold on. Okay, well. All right, so give me what's going on here. All right, anyways. So here goes my account right here. I want to show you all. I finally got the icon removed. All right, so this is my account. And as you can see, this is called Script. So Script is where you can find ebooks, auto books, documents, magazine, and whatnot. As a matter of fact, let me put the title of the book on here. Right, they were her property. So right here, you have the auto book, as you can see. So if you guys want to like check out the auto book, there it goes right here at the very top. Then, of course, they have documents up here that was uploaded, the PDF. Yep. So you guys can find it right here on this page. You can also find the auto book, but the membership is going to cost you around like $10 a month. Yeah, I know you might think that's a lot, but it's really worth the money. You know what I mean? Because you're able to find a lot of books online and find a lot of auto books that you're looking for if you don't really have the time to read. So yeah, this is my account right here. As you can see, you got books, auto books, snapshots, article, documents, sheet music, and podcasts. So yeah, they also have podcasts on here. All right. So with that being said, you guys, that's all I have for the evening. It's getting late. So I need to get off of here. But thank you guys for tuning in, watching. And make sure you guys subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, share my video content. And I will reconnect with you guys later. Take it easy. Please be safe. And shout out to the sister in the chat room. Shout out to Sister Courtney. Thank you for coming through, Sister Courtney. Appreciate it a lot. I really do. So make sure you guys check the channel out. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification bell and all that great stuff. And also, if you want to support what I'm doing, you can also, send something to my Cash App. If you like what I'm doing and like the information that I'm presenting, go ahead, Cash App, $Tip World. So that's up to you guys. All right. All right, then. And also make sure you check out Sister Courtney's channel. She has a YouTube page. So Sister Courtney's channel is called Omega Courtney. Check her page out and all that great stuff. She has a lot of great contents on there as well. So big up to everybody. All right, and big up to Team Osiris. Big up to my people from Pseudo Killers, the Mozzie Warrior Clan, Brother Kofi Pazai TV, the brothers from the NBK. Now they go by a new name. I think it's called Each One Teach One now. I think that's the name of their YouTube channel. But shout out to those brothers there. So make sure you check out their contents. They have a lot of great information out there. And whoever I didn't give a shout out to, thank you all for being there, being supportive, and just valuing your time and all. Okay. But anyways, I gotta get going though. It's late. All right. So peace.